Mustang Sally. Guess you better slow that Mustang down. Mustang Sally now, baby. Guess you better slow that Mustang down. You've been running all over town. Oh, I guess I gotta put your flat feet on the ground. Sing it to them all the time, girls. All you wanna do is ride around, Sally.
Ride, Sally, ride.
All you wanna do is ride around, Sally.
Ride, Sally, ride.
All you wanna do is ride around, Sally. All you wanna do is ride around, Sally. Sally. One of these every morning, I'm gonna be wiping those weeping eyes. Yeah. All right. I bought you a brand new Mustang. It was 1965. Now you come around signifying the world. Girl, you won't let me ride Mustang Sally now, baby. Guess you better slow that Mustang down. All right. You've been running all over town. Oh, I guess I gotta put your flat feet on the ground. Oh yeah, baby, you gotta put your flat feet. All you wanna do is ride around, Sally. 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 One of these every morning, I'm gonna be wiping those weeping eyes. Yeah. Oh yeah, baby. Come on, boss. Those weeping eyes. Oh yeah, baby. Those weeping eyes. Yeah. Oh yeah. Those weeping eyes. Yeah, yeah. Oh, those weeping eyes. Those weeping eyes. Those weeping eyes. Yeah,
Every day when the work is behind you and the shop and the store put the lock on the door, just get away where your worries won't find you. If you like, well, I'll tell you more. Don't let the day get the better of you. When the evening comes, there's so much to do. You better put on your best and wear a smile. Just come along with me a while, 'cause I tell you, I know a place where the music is fine and the lights are always low. I know a place where we can go. At the door there's a man who will greet you. Then you go downstairs to some tables and chairs. Soon I'm sure you'll be tapping your feet, because the beat is the greatest there. a swinging place, a cellar full of noise. It's got an atmosphere of its own somehow. You gotta come along right now, 'cause I tell you, I know a place where the music is fine and the lights are always low. I know a place where we can go. All around there are girls and boys. It's a swinging place, a cellar full of noise. It's got an atmosphere of its own somehow. You gotta come along right now, 'cause I tell you, I know a place where the music is fine and the lights are always low. I know a place where we can go. I know a place where we can go. I know a place where the lights are low. You're gonna love this place, I know. I know a place where we can go. I know a place where the lights.
So the picture appears. Hi everybody, welcome to Stratosphere Lounge episode 110. Your host Bill Whittle here, and living walking stress pill here. There's 1,000 things that I had to try and get done, and pick up a rental car and all kinds of other things. And anyway, here we are. I certainly didn't want to miss 2 weeks in a row. It was a bad habit I was trying to get rid of the last time, and so here we are in 2016. I just tried to pack so many things into the day today. One thing we did was another interview with Stefan Molyneux. I thought we'd be talking about the Oregon situation. We ended up talking about everything but one thing we can all agree on is it's going to be a placid and tranquil year here, 2006. It's not going to be really much going on at all whatsoever. Wow. We were talking about all kinds of things. What does this Trump thing mean? Is Hillary going to go to jail? It's going to be a year unlike any other, and peaceful and tranquil are not, I think, two words that 2016 will be remembered by when it's all said and done. I get the feeling that this is going to be kind of a once in a lifetime kind of year, just absolutely crazy, nutty year, and I don't think anybody can predict what's going to happen. I'm not trying to predict what's going to happen. I just think it's going to be really, 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 really interesting. It's starting to look like from the beginning that it's going to be the year where we're going to get the year where we get the most old school, corrupt, old-fashioned, inside Washington establishment, graft-filled felon on one hand, and Donald Trump on the other, who, the people on our side of the aisle range from either adoring the guy, despising the guy. I've seen our allies say both things about him, and I've had people refer to him, the followers, as Trump-tards, and then I've heard other people refer to him as the only guy who can do what's going to happen, and whether he's going to make it or not, I don't know, but it's going to be interesting. And if all Donald Trump does for this country is destroy the political media pop culture complex, the big circle between Hollywood, New York, and Washington, if he destroys that 50-year-old liberal establishment, then I said to Stefan we should make a gold statue out of the guy and put him on top of the Washington Monument. But it's going to be interesting. So I do not know what to say about that other than hang on. So the reason I've been scrambling around so much is my cousin Ash. I keep calling my cousin. I don't know what it is about that. He's my nephew. He is on his way in the air right now from Fort Lauderdale with my sister. He's 7 years old. He's never seen snow before. We booked the flight, I want to say back in October, and we're going to try and bring him in around try to bring them in around week between Christmas and New Year's, but we wouldn't know if there was going to be any snow up there. But there's snow up there now, and our operations manager, Carly, has just arrived. So there's more snow up there than we know what to do with. It's just been packed. So it's going to be hard for most of you, although some people can relate. If you've never, if you grew up in snow, you don't know what that snow experience is like. I grew up in Bermuda in Florida, and first time I was in snow, I actually was born in New York City, so I was in snow when I was too young to remember it. But making the trip up and seeing snow when you're a little boy, is a big deal. And so he's going to get more snow we know what to do with. So I'm going to have to make this one relatively brief tonight, hopefully an hour and a half or so, get out of here around 7:30, something in that general ballpark. But as you know, tonight is the was it Fly-by-Wire? No. It's the show where I'm going to take questions exclusively from the comment stream. So here's the way this is going to work. I'm going to try and do it as briefly as possible, keep the answers as brief as possible, but there's something that you need to understand about how the comment stream works, unfortunately, and that is, first of all, I am 10, 15 seconds ahead of you in time, and secondly, I can only glance over there and see maybe, 3 individual comments at any given time, 3 or 4. So if I were you, I would kind of save your question, copy and paste, save it, and then hit it in there. And if I can get to it, I can get to it. If not, I won't. But it sounds like a fun idea. I've been looking forward to doing this for a while. A lot of people say, can you take questions from the comment stream? And I can't believe we haven't done it in 109 episodes, but we're going to do it on 110. So anyway, I will take the first question I see up there that I like, and like I said, you're probably going to have to send them a bunch of times to see what we're going to take or not, but I'm ready to rumble, so let's see. Get a little dead air is what we get. While this message that I sent to you is just now getting to you, as I say, I'm a little bit ahead here. Do you believe North Korea detonated an H-bomb from Winston Smith Room 101? I think that North Korea detonated something that gave it enough of a signature to have some of the qualities of an H-bomb. I certainly don't think they detonated an H-bomb to the degree that it was a real big thermonuclear device. Again, they may have achieved a little tiny bit of fusion, and maybe that was enough for them to say it was an H-bomb. But I mean, look, they detonated, I forget what their first A-bomb detonation was. I want to say it was 5 kilotons. The Hiroshima bomb was 18 kilotons, and the Nagasaki bomb was 22. And the first one that they did was 5 kilotons, and that's basically just it's such a fizzle. It's like you lit a fuse on a firecracker. Instead of it just not going anything, it just went like that. I don't know much about it, frankly, to be honest with you. I just simply don't believe that they detonated an underground hydrogen bomb in the way that we understand hydrogen bombs. As I said, I suspect they got something done, and that released enough of a fusion signature, because the difference between an A-bomb and an H-bomb, for those of you that don't know, is an A-bomb is a fission reaction where a big atom, like a uranium atom or plutonium atom, is struck by neutrons, and it splits apart into smaller atoms, and they release a fair amount of energy. Hydrogen bomb is where helium is fused together, releasing even more energy, a lot more energy. But in order to have that heat reaction, that's why it's called a thermonuclear reaction. In order to fuse the hydrogen together into helium, I might have said helium together. In order to fuse the hydrogen into helium, you need to start with an A-bomb. You need to have the concussion pressure of an A-bomb that drives the H-bomb. So it's on the desk. So that's the difference between the two. And the North Koreans, I don't think they've detonated anything that looks and feels like an H-bomb. I just don't believe it. So yeah, I think that's it. That's pretty much it. MSW Melbourne says, do you think this administration can actually enforce the executive order on gun control? I have something to say about that executive order on gun control, because look, again, I didn't really read the details of it, but let's just say for the sake of the argument that it's a background check and waiting period, because that's kind of what I want to talk about more than anything, really. In other words, let's say that that the executive order was going to apply California standards to the rest of the country. I don't know if that's what it says, but it's something like that. it's not. I was listening to it and I was expecting, hey, we're coming to take your guns, and he didn't say that. He was talking about background checks and talking about, sort of a more of a database kind of thing and so on. So here's what's interesting about that. I live in California. I bought an AR-15 out here, and I bought my 45 sidearm out here, my 45 ACP out here. And both times I had to undergo a background check, and both times I had to go through a 10-day waiting period. And here's what's interesting for me about that question. What's interesting is I don't really consider either of those things to be unreasonable. But after I had that thought, I realized it doesn't matter whether it's unreasonable or not. It's the only thing that matters is it constitutional or not? Is it legal or not? And I don't think it is legal. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, and anything that gets in the way of that is infringing your right. You don't have to have a background check for speech, and you don't have to have a 10-day waiting period for speech so that you don't say something hateful. Once again, the reason you need to get into the essence of what this is about is the understanding that the Constitution, that was the operations manager, Carla, everybody. So she's helping me get ready for my nephew's arrival. She's been working all day on that. And she's probably interacted with some of you before. She's a lovely person, and I know everybody out there who's talked to her was just terrific, but that's who that was. And you may see her again. Undoubtedly you will. So anyway, the thing about the Second Amendment right is, while I don't have a particular problem with the waiting period, and I don't have a particular problem with the background check. On some level, you have to do a background check because felons are prohibited from owning guns. But with that said, that's not the point. It's not a question of it being reasonable. The question is the right to it predates the Constitution. The right to it is inherent, and it cannot be infringed. So while I may think that those kind of things are relatively reasonable, and I'm certainly willing to put up with them, that's not a reflection of me being squishy on the subject, because the fact of the matter is rather that that you have a pre-existing right to self-defense that shall not be abridged by the government, and anything they do to infringe upon it is a violation of your existing rights. So there's that. As far as him being able to enforce the look, what he did and what he said, he started this thing before we got the waterworks and before we got the tremendous sadness, he admitted that these things wouldn't have had any effect, and basically when you come out and say, look, we're going to, every time I think about those kids at Sandy Hook, it just makes me so angry. And now we're going to enforce a law through executive order completely illegally that would have done nothing to prevent the occurrence at Sandy Hook. So that's kind of where we are these days, right? It's the theater. It's the theater of the progressive presidency. I'm not the first person to come up with this. I saw a great analysis of this the other day. It basically said, when he's interviewing with Chris Matthews, it's like President Obama is playing the role of the heroic progressive president, stymied at every turn by these mean-spirited, conservatives. And when I was talking with Stefan Milieu earlier today, I basically said, yeah, you could just see it on his face. And this is the story that the progressives are telling about him, and it's more importantly, it's the story he tells himself. And that story is this: watching Obama at that press conference, I just kept thinking, what a shame that we're not a better country for him. It's got to be just awful to be Obama, or especially for the fans of Obama, to see a man with that kind of wisdom and that kind of sensitivity and that kind of heart, that kind of deep soul, and forget the deep soul, the brilliant mind behind it, the sensitivity and the ability to see all different sides of things, and to have a man that brilliant be saddled with a country and a citizenry so primitive and so violent and so racist and so unpleasant in every way. It's got to be hard on the guy. They would make me cry if I was him, certainly. You watch him and you listen to the way people talk about him, it's like, if only the president had a better country. And that, I would certainly be crying if I was him too. If only we had a country that could live up to the awesomeness of Obama and the justice of the guy and the caring, especially the caring, more than anything, the caring. If only we had a country that cared as much as he did and had the wisdom that he did to see what simple common sense measures we could take to significantly reduce the amount of gun violence in America, like the one which we just illegally signed into law that won't have any impact on anything. And we just opened the statement by saying it wouldn't have any impact on anything. Certainly wouldn't have had any impact on the thing I'm crying about, but that doesn't mean we're not going to cry, because it's not about this is the thing. It's not about the law. It's not about gun violence. It's not about saving lives. It's not about any of that stuff. It's about how does the president look? What are the optics of Barack Obama at the moment? He's been savage lately because he's been so weak on this terrorism thing. People are buying guns to defend themselves. That really upsets him. It must upset him that he's the greatest gun salesman in the history of the world. I talked to a friend of mine who's a Marine, and he said if you bought Smith & Wesson stock at the beginning of his administration, you sold it now, you'd be a very, very wealthy person. So that's got to bother him. He knows on some level, I'm sure he believes that this has some good. I'm sure these progressives actually believe this nonsense that you can control the murder rate by controlling the gun rate. But it's got to bother him that he's sold more guns than anybody else. So the main thing is really, since these laws aren't going to have any effect, since they admit that they're not going to have any effect, and since everybody knows they're not going to have any effect, why are we doing it? Well, we're doing it because we have to be seen to be doing something, you see. Our progressive base wants those guns controlled to get the murder rate down. And in the fact that controlling the guns is impossible, and the idea that controlling the guns to get the murder rate down is not only impossible, is just... It's not only counterintuitive, it's not backed by evidence. In fact, on the contrary, there's plenty of evidence that says it's just the exact opposite. So he has to cry. And the second I saw him crying, I was at PJTV taping Trifecta, and I looked up and I saw him wiping the tears away, and I just said in front of everybody, I just looked up in there and said, I don't believe you. I don't believe you. I'm sorry. I don't believe you. It's stagecraft. And that's what it is. It's just simple stagecraft. It's showing his hardcore base that... I just care so much. Why am I constrained by these horrible citizens of this country I live in? And I noticed that nobody mentioned, that he didn't mention in our big effort to control guns and in order to have the background checks to stop the murder rate, I noticed he didn't mention that they were murder rate capital of the country is his own state, his own city. His own city is where more people are murdered than anywhere else in this country on a total number basis. It's his policies in gun control places like Baltimore and New Orleans and all the rest where the murders are. And I got to tell you something. I'm a little tired. I don't generally find myself to be susceptible to what Europeans think, but I don't like the fact that Europeans think they can't set foot into this country without being murdered when they go to, drive down the freeway or something. I'm getting a little tired of the fact that these murders in these crime-ridden urban areas that are the domain of Democrats is giving this country such a god-awful reputation. If you take the murder rate of this country is due to the murder rate in Chicago, Baltimore, New Orleans, Washington, D.C. That's what makes this country so bloody dangerous, and it's basically black male criminals killing other black male criminals. And we all have to pay the price, not only for it in terms of the crime we have to endure, but for the idea that America is this giant murder capital. I noticed the president, and I noticed Hillary Clinton, and I noticed Joe Biden, very serious Joe Biden, who can't stand to bear think about this tragedy. It's such a big tragedy. He's regretting that he got into the office every day. So he's, I'm tired of my country paying the price in terms of reputation for the fact that these Democrats are trying to control guns among honest citizens, while the murder rate is, in fact, being driven by inner-city murders. You don't like it? I'm sorry to hear it, but it's the truth. Baltimore, these murder rates of 50 people per 100,000 or something like that. It's just awful. And so they go after the guns and the law-abiding citizens in order to deflect the fact that people don't want to be talking about, well, where are these murders committed, who commits them, and so on. Somebody's asked me 6 times to show me their EDC. I have no idea what EDC is, Mr. Calzone. I just don't know. So if you want to tell me what an EDC is and you want me to show it to you, I'll be happy to once I figure out what it is. So anyway, the performance was just awful. It was embarrassing to me, and especially embarrassing to me because I know the effect that it must have had about his, thank you, everyday carry. It must have had a huge effect on the 20% of the population that still, believes in this guy. It's not even theater; it's kabuki. It's mask theater. It's a theater of masks and the theater of these ritualized gestures. And here's a law that won't have any effect. And I'm going to show everybody how deeply, deeply hurt I am by this. I don't have an EDC permit. I live in California. So let's just get that out of the way. The Second Amendment doesn't apply to me the way that it applies to you. It applies to me 20-30% the way it applies to other people. There is no EDC in California. I could be the mayor of the city. I probably couldn't get an EDC. I could get armed bodyguards to defend me. That wouldn't be hard at all. But I don't have everyday carry. Is this a concealed carry permit? I guess that's what it is. I don't have one. Or open carry permit? I don't have one of those either. And I'm not going to get one. And I'm not going to get one because I live in California. And it's just not going to happen. So, there you go. That's just the way it is out here. And that's a price that I'm willing to pay to be here underneath the red eye of mortar here underneath the volcanoes. So I saw that after the January 1st that the in Texas I see people just gun strapped on their hips going shopping. I think it's awesome. And once again, look, I don't particularly want to live in a country where everybody has to have a gun strapped to their hips. It wasn't like that in the 50s and the early 60s. It wasn't like that in the 40s. And the reason that not everybody had a gun strapped to their belt was because we hadn't had liberal crime policies yet. The reason that the liberals are out of their minds by people carrying guns in public is because we had 50 years of liberal crime policy. We didn't have to carry guns before. We didn't have to worry about getting shot before so much because back prior to the 60s, if somebody was murdering people in downtown, they'd be arrested and thrown in jail and prosecuted. And if it could be proven that they'd murdered the guy, he'd get the electric chair. And that was basically it. So the reason that everybody runs around armed now is not because conservatives want to run around armed. The reason that people run around armed now is because of liberals, because the liberals will not punish crime. And they'll punish the people who are the victims of crime. Somebody breaks into your house. Yes, what did you do? Well, I shot him. Well, you're going to go to prison, and the guy you shot, turns out he survived, and he's going to sue you, and he's going to win $10 million settlement because he broke into your house in the middle of the night and you shot him. So you go to jail, and he goes to some mansion someplace. And when you have these kind of policies, what you get is when you support the criminals and you suppress the honest citizens, you get more criminals and fewer honest citizens. And so when that happens, everybody's got to ammo up because these damn liberals have made this country so crime-ridden and crime and murder are so tolerated that, of course, we have to defend ourselves. Of course we do. What is it, 1,000 murders in Chicago? We know where these murders are being committed. We know where they're being committed. We know who they're being committed by. And we know upon whom they're being committed. The Black Lives Matter thing, you can actually immediately dismiss the Black Lives Matter movement out of hand like that because the number one murder of black people is other black people with guns, and the number of police that shoot unarmed black people has got to be a small fraction of probably 1% of the total murders committed against black people. And if Black Lives Matter really wanted to get down to the issue of actually worrying about black lives, they would take a serious look at who's doing the murdering of most black people, and the answer is other black people. So I'm not impressed by this Black Lives Matter crowd talking about the fact that maybe 2 shootings a year are iffy, or that's not to say there aren't bad cops out there. There aren't to say that there aren't. I've seen some cases that were just simply shocking in terms of, I think that policeman just murdered that guy. And that's a word I use pretty carefully, but there are 1 or 2. And all the rest of this agitation is political intimidation. It's the Democratic Party's essay. It's their stormtroopers. And basically what they're saying is give us what we want or else, the cities are going to catch fire. And I'm tired of being blackmailed by these people. I've had enough of it. I'm done with it. So Black Lives Matter, you want to be about saving black lives? Start looking at who's killing black people. Who's taking black lives? predominantly in this country, percentage-wise, 80%, something like that. Who is it? Oh, turns out it's other black people. Well, when you decide to address that first, when you decide to address the 80% problem, and then the other 10% problem, and then the 6% problem, and you finally get down to the 3 or 4% problem, I'll take you seriously. But until then, I don't. And this idea that a black kid can't walk through the streets of white America without being assassinated, we can test this theory, We can test this theory. We can send a black kid through a white neighborhood at 2 o'clock in the morning, or we can send a white girl through a black neighborhood at 2 o'clock in the morning. One or the other. Take a black woman, march her down the street in a miniskirt in the heart of Beverly Hills, let's say, or Simi Valley, and see if she's assassinated by a policeman. Then take a white woman and send her through the streets of Compton or Chicago or New Orleans or Washington, D.C., and we'll see. We get some data. We'll find out which one is the actual truth. And I don't think we have to do that experiment because I think everybody knows, we know, they know what the truth of this is. I'm tired of being told that things are true that are not true. I'm tired of it, and I'm not going to put up with it anymore. That's why we're here. We're here to come out and say it. It's not that black people can't walk through the streets of white America in this country. There's just many, many parts of black America that white Americans can't walk through without being murdered. And everybody knows it's true, and everybody on the left pretends that it isn't. And this is why the world is where the world is. So, somebody who's saying your first Stratosphere Lounge, get rid of the ads. The ads interrupting you are built into Ustream. I can't do anything about that. But you can get ad block, either for your Chrome browser or your Firefox browser, and I suppose they've got it for Safari now. If you want to just go ahead and install ad block before the next show or install it now, come back and just reload the page and the ads will be gone. Yeah, that's it for the gun thing. Somebody asked me about BLM, Bureau of Land Management, the cattle ranchers issue. Let's talk about that for a bit. I thought I was going to talk to Stefan about that today, and it's the only thing we didn't get to, which is a bit of a shock. Because that's kind of what I thought the interview was about. So, yeah, it turns out I'm a little ammoed up for that. A guy I know named Sean, just earlier today, sent me a link to somebody, and he said, have you heard of this woman? She's the female you. She does what you do. And I said, oh, okay, well, that'd be interesting. And so he sent me a link. This was before the interview, by happy coincidence, and her name is Chris Ann Hall. I don't know if anybody's seen any of her videos. So let's talk about Bureau of Land Management for a good long time here, because I think it's a hot topic. I'll probably do my next afterburner about that. Look, I know the basics, but I certainly understand the Constitution, and maybe on some level I understand the Constitution better than constitutional lawyers. I think I understand it morally better than they do, or on some level, maybe at least from a storytelling point of view. But I certainly don't understand the Constitution the way a good constitutional lawyer does, and especially somebody who not only understands the Constitution, but likes it. This president used to teach constitutional law, but he taught it in such a way when he was being interviewed prior to taking office, he talked about the problem with the Constitution is there's so many constraining powers. They prevent the government from doing all the stuff that we would really like to do. And he clearly said this. There's not any question about it. He said it as if he said it's a problem. It's a problem. The problem is the Constitution limits the power of the government. That's the problem. So that's how this thing got elected. He knows what he's doing, and he knows why he's doing it. He's just on their side. He's not on the Constitution side. He's on the other side. So anyway, right around noon today, I saw a video from my first time I ever saw one of her videos, a woman named Chris Ann Hall. And she's a constitutional lawyer down in Florida. She went to the University of Florida, so we know that she's got integrity and class and high intelligence. I think it's a given. So she did a video on the situation up in Oregon. Now, I had heard some things about the people up in Oregon. I'd heard the original story about the family. I heard about them burning land to protect their land, and some of the land that got burned was federal land. And then I heard about the prison sentences, and they were supposed to get 5 years, and one got a year, and the other got 6 months or 5 months or something. And then after they came out, they wanted to put him back in jail again for the 5 years. So I understood all of that, and I understood the provocative nature of what the government was doing. I'd interviewed Dinesh D'Souza, who was also given an extraordinary. Forget about the severity of it. Just looking at it statistically, what happened to Dinesh D'Souza was he was given an unheard of punishment for the crime he committed, which was a minor crime. He got an unheard of punishment because the Justice Department wanted to get him because he made fun of the president. So when I hear that these guys are, rising up on their hind legs up in Oregon like actual patriots, I understand that the prosecution of these brothers has been not only abnormal, but provocative, and that the federal government's out of control. And I had all these arguments lined up, and then I also heard arguments about, these guys may not be exactly the kind of people you want to make maybe these are the guys you want to make your stand behind, that there's a lot of kind of gray area, and some of these guys are pretty iffy, and there's a bunch of, racial supremacists up there, and so on and so forth. And I just I don't know what to do. I mean, I've got an opinion on it, and my opinion at the time prior to seeing this video was the kind of weird conundrum that the Oregon situation puts me in personally, and I guess some of you this way too, in the sense that looking at it without getting into the constitutional issue, you can basically say it this way. These guys were provoked. The federal government overreached. The federal government was unjust. The federal government was way out of bounds, which is all unusual. The federal government prosecuted these guys. Now the pundits, the liberal pundits, are screaming for them to be executed, basically just drop an A-bomb on these guys, because the idea of armed civilians carrying American flags and Gadsden flags and talking about the Constitution terrifies the left more than anything. This is where they're tender. This is what scares them to the quick. They're not afraid of Al Qaeda or ISIS because they don't run into Al Qaeda or ISIS. They're not afraid of them because they're not here. But the one thing they fear more than anything, this is what happens in Oregon right now for the left, is what a slave uprising is for a slave master on the plantations, and the great fear of the slave owners in the Confederacy. The reason all of those laws were in existence, the reason for all the cruelty, the reason for the whips, the reason for the dogs, the reason for the lynching, the reason for all of the Jim Crow laws, the reason for all of this, just all the slander, the reason for all of the intimidation, the Klan, the burning crosses, all of it. It's all the same. They're there to keep black Americans terrified, and as long as they could be kept terrified, they could be kept subservient. They could be kept under their thumb. And that's what the Confederate slave owners and the people in the Deep South feared. Was they feared the slave uprising. They feared that these black people would rise up in the middle of the night and kill them because they outnumbered them so greatly. And everything was based on that, all of it. So now the question is, the left feels that way about these uprisings. The idea of armed American citizens standing up for their constitutional rights terrifies them. That's why they're going ballistic. That's why they're losing their minds. Montel Williams basically go in there and assassinate these people, just gun them down. So, okay. So the question is, all of this stuff makes sense, right? And all of this stuff is kind of pro rancher stuff, all of it, and I mean it all. And I don't intend to walk back from any of it. The only thing in this mix that makes it an interesting subject and complicates it for me is these guys are breaking the law. They're breaking the law, and so that's where the question is. I mean, we still respect the law, and the thing about this that's so appalling to me is that Occupy Wall Street broke the law. You'd have a Tea Party event, people would get their own permits, buy their own porta potties, hire the extra police, and so on, and they'd leave the place cleaner when they found it. So Tea Party protests are legal protests. Occupy Wall Street was not only illegal in terms of the protest being illegal, but Occupy Wall Street people would simply smash cars and they'd defecate on doorsteps and they'd break windows and they'd burn buildings, and nobody did a thing. Nobody said boo. This is a legitimate civil rights action. These people have a legitimate case, and this is just the righteous anger of the people. And after Occupy Wall Street fizzled, they had to restart the whole thing. It's the same basic crowd with Black Lives Matter crowd. It's basically street thuggery. It's basically lawlessness. It's basically the ability to go into a town and riot it and burn it to the ground without consequences. Not only without consequences, knowing full well that the president and the Justice Department are on your side. Smash everything up, because as long as we keep smashing everything up, then the people who own these businesses and pay the taxes are going to be intimidated, and they'll give us what we want. So to hear these guys being demonized after 5 years of Occupy Wall Street and 3 years of Black Lives Matter, when these people are just rioting on the streets, committing all these crimes on a daily basis, the idea that now suddenly we have to bring out the army and attack helicopters to kill 150 people who've never fired on anybody, they've never destroyed any property, they've never hurt anybody, they've never done anything like that. is appalling. And what's more appalling is that ultimately, when you get right down to it, it's still against the law. And this is where the issue falls for many of us. They've put two competing high value moral imperatives on the scale, and they're asking people like me to decide which one is more important to you, obeying the law, or is there something about this where now you've been a law and order guy your whole life, now we're calling, no, it's okay to break the law. So I think my answer to this would be this. I think there's cause for an actual revolution against the federal government. I'm going to get to what this woman said in this video of hers. But it's either on or it's off, right? I mean, that's really, I kind of think that's the practical answer I have right now. It's either on or it's off. And it's not on. So where do you go? I mean, either the government is declared to be lawless by a huge number of the American people, and the revolution is on, where the social compact is irrevocably broken. There is no more redress for grievances, no more legal redress for grievances. And since there's no more legal redress for grievances, and since there is no longer any way to have your voice heard in this so-called democracy, then the government is lawless, and then all bets are off. Now, if that happened, I know which side I'd be on, but that isn't this. This is not that. And so it's kind of like, well, are we in rebellion against the law, yes or no? And we're not. The country is not in rebellion against the law. So my feeling would be, my measured feeling, I hate to have to come down with a kind of a legalistic kind of a take on this, but that's where it puts me. My legalistic sort of trying to parse out my moral position on this is, while I think their action is not only justified, and certainly more justified than the Occupy Wall Street people, and while they haven't committed any harm, and while they haven't done any of the things that these other groups that went away scot-free did, I still think they're breaking the law. And that bothers me. It puts me in a tough spot. Now, as I said, all of this was where I was before I saw this video. As I said, the person who did it was named Chris Ann Hall, and she's got a video on Oregon. It was about 100, high hundreds, maybe 200,000 views when I saw it earlier today. And then finally we got to the real issue here. And this is why it's great to have somebody who really understands the Constitution, and I mean every aspect of it, like my friend Scott Ott, who's here. And Scotty, I'm sorry I had to move the show to Thursday. I hope I didn't step on your show. Now we talk about, what does the Constitution say? And as I learned from this extraordinary gator, a constitutional attorney and patriot who she really made it clear. She said it's not about the ranchers. The story's not about the ranchers. The story's not about the family. It's not about the right or wrong of that family. It's not about occupying the post. It's not about any of that. That's not what this is about. I said, okay, I'm listening. And basically she said, let's look at what the Constitution says. And what she said was, look at Article 1, Section 8. These are the enumerated powers of the Congress. And look at Clause 17. And basically Clause 17 said that as far as federal land is concerned, Clause 17 says that the District of Columbia can have 10 square miles of land if the state cede it to have a federal district called the District of Columbia. That's authorized by the Constitution, but no greater than 10 square miles. And also the Constitution, with the permission of the states, and the permission of the states has to be ongoing. If the states withdraw the permission, then these have to go away. The permission of the states is also granted for what she called forts and ports. But basically, if you read the actual language, it says things like dockyards, armories, arsenals, forts, and so on. But forts and ports is pretty good. Basically, what they're saying is that the federal government does, in fact, have a claim to land to set up forts, to defend the country. Things like arsenals. There's a clear constitutional allowance for. And the Constitution says the building. It doesn't say the land, it says a building. You can have a building for an arsenal, or a building or a set of buildings for a port. But these need to be granted by the states. The states have the power. And as Chris Ann went on to point out, which is something I never really quite really fully realized. I mean, it's one of these things I knew, but it's not one of these things I'd fully felt. She said, when we talk about the Constitution, we always talk about the people, that it's an agreement between the people and the government, but it's not. What it really is, when you really get down to brass tacks, the Constitution is a legal contract between the states and the federal government. That's what it is. And I thought I don't know if I would call it a profound insight. It's just something that penetrated the dimness up here and got through. It is. And so in terms of the land that the federal government can own, it's clearly stated that the federal government can own the District of Columbia so long as it remains less than 10 square miles and may own the buildings and obviously the land underneath it for forts and ports, basically. And that's all. And that's it. And the forts and ports part, they have to have the ongoing permission of the states. And if the state of Nevada says, oh, well, you can put a fort in here, and then 50 years later or 5 minutes later, state of Nevada changes its mind and says, you know what, we've decided we don't want you to here, then they have to leave. So I wish I had the sense to bring this graphic, but we're taking these questions on the fly. I should have had it. I'll have it eventually. I don't know if you guys have seen the graphic of federal land ownership west of the Mississippi, but federal land ownership is red, and the 3 or 4 states closest to the Pacific coast are almost all red. It's shocking. Nevada is, 80-90% owned by the federal government? Arizona, New Mexico, Oregon, parts of Oregon, Washington State. It's amazing how much land the federal government owns. And Chris Ann Hall's point is it doesn't have the right to own any of it. The Bureau of Land Management, these people are facing off against, is an illegal organization. In fact, you can make the case that the EPA is not authorized by the Constitution, and it's certainly not, neither is the Department of Transportation or the Department of Energy, Health and Human Services. None of them are authorized by the Constitution. They all need to go away. Doesn't mean that the work that they do needs to go away. It needs to be handled by the states, and they would do it a lot more effectively, or the people who do it even more effectively. But this ownership of a third of the country by the federal government is a little bit stepping outside the boundaries of 10 square miles and forts and ports, right? Now, people have said this has been going on since Teddy Roosevelt's time or whatever, and then there's all these Supreme Court decisions validating this interpretation. And Chris Ann came to the same conclusion I came to when I was talking about the Commerce Clause. She doesn't care what the Supreme Court said about it, and I don't care either what the Supreme Court said. It doesn't matter. The Supreme Court is empowered by the Constitution, and so the Supreme Court does not get to rule against the Constitution. The rule of the Supreme Court does not supersede the Constitution because the Supreme Court's authority comes from the Constitution. When I was talking about the Commerce Clause, and people would say, well, there's all these historical precedents that the Supreme Court has said this was okay, and my response is, well, the Supreme Court is wrong. It's wrong. Well, are you a constitutional scholar? Are you a legal expert? No, I'm not. I'm actually not a legal expert or a constitutional scholar. I'm the guy who the Constitution was written for, directly. It was written for me. It was written for me as a citizen of this country, and the Constitution was written in clear, simple English sentences that could be understood by anybody. And so I'm one of those anybodies, and I can read a sentence. And when it comes to the Commerce Clause, it says the Congress shall have the power to regulate, not control, not to allow, but to regulate, to make even, commerce between the states, foreign powers, and the Indian tribes. So if you're not a state like Minnesota, if you're not a foreign power like Great Britain, if you're not an Indian tribe like the Navajo, the federal government has nothing to do with your commerce. They can't touch you. And if the Supreme Court ruled otherwise, the Supreme Court is wrong. It's wrong. It's clear sentence. There's nothing there that can be misunderstood. The federal government, the Constitution divides power between the federal government, called the United States, the states, and the people. And if they wanted the Commerce Clause to say that Congress can mess around with your commerce, then it would have said Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce among the people. It does not say that. It says specifically the opposite of that. So her point is these people, their grievance is immaterial. She was saying, and I think this is exactly the way to go, she was saying the grievance is immaterial because the entire thing is illegal. The whole thing out of the basket is illegal. The fact that there's a red dot visible from space is against the Constitution. They're not allowed to own that land. And that's where the argument is. And I think, wow, yeah, that clears up everything for me. That's wonderful. I don't have to worry about it anymore. I don't have to parse it anymore. I don't have to say, well, on the other hand, these guys are breaking the law. They're not breaking the law. They're not breaking the law. It's the government that's breaking the law. The fact that the Bureau for Land Management exists is a constitutional violation. It's breaking the law of the land, and it needs to stop. Now, the bigger question is, can this ever get back into the bottle? I don't know. That's a much more serious question. But that's really the issue, right? The Bureau of Land Management doesn't get to prosecute these people because not only, this is the point I was trying to make a second ago, you can say that the EPA or the Department of Transportation aren't authorized by the Constitution, and you'd be right, and they don't belong there. But they're not necessarily antithetical to the Constitution. In fact, what I'm trying to say is the EPA is not mentioned one way or another in the Constitution. So, since it's not mentioned, it should not have the power to exist. If you want an EPA, amend the Constitution, a federal EPA. But the Bureau of Land Management, on the other hand, is in direct contravention to the Constitution because the Constitution in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 states pretty clearly that the government is prohibited from owning the land. Prohibited from it. So if the federal government's prohibited from owning the land, and these guys are having an argument with the branch of the federal government that is protecting land that it is not allowed to own in the first place, then that's where the argument is. And I thought, my God, that woman has got it exactly right. So I don't care about these guys. I don't care if they're racist. I don't care if they're Nazis. I don't care if they're progressives. I don't care if they're graphic art designers from San Francisco. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they are. It doesn't matter what they do. It matters that the Bureau of Land Management, who they're fighting against, is not only not authorized by the Constitution, it's specifically prohibited by the Constitution. And that's putting it a little more succinctly than she did, because I think I've just landed on it. This is why I like to do these topics before I go out and shoot them. The Bureau of Land Management is prohibited by the Constitution in a way that the EPA is not prohibited. It's just not authorized. EPA is not authorized. Department of Education is not authorized. The Department of Transportation is not authorized, and they should go. They don't belong there. But it's not prohibited. But this is prohibited by Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. And it's been prohibited for 100 years. So what the hell do we do about that? What do we do? I don't know. I saw a question I want to answer next, so it's been asked a couple times. Let's see if I can remember it. But this is where we need to be. This is where we need to be, and this is where we need to be fighting, and this is where we need to be arguing, right on this point, and just read it. Because look, there have been so many violations of the Constitution. In other words, look, I can make this as succinct as possible. I hope Scott's still watching because he's such a great expert on the Constitution and the founders. If you can, with impunity for 100 years, have a third of the country owned by the federal government when Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 specifically says they get 10 square miles plus forts and ports. If the Constitution can be violated in that way, then why can Barack Obama simply not stay for a third term? Why can he just not run for a third term? What's to prevent him from doing that? Well, it's against the Constitution. This is against the Constitution. It's been happening for 100 years, right? Why should a senator just serve 6 terms or a representative? Why can't a representative just stay in office? Just stay in office. I'm not leaving. What do you mean not leaving? You lost the election. I don't care. I'm not leaving. Well, the Constitution says you're limited to 2 terms. Yeah, but the Constitution also says that the federal government can own 10 square miles of land, and they own a third of the country. So my point is, does the Constitution law or not? Is it law or not? Because it's not 17 different constitutions, It's not like there's the Constitution for the land part, another Constitution for the Congress. It's one document. So does it, yes or no? Is it law, yes or no? And if it is, then this all stuff needs to be sold to the public, and it needs to be sold or given to the public. They ought to sell it to the public at a very low rate, and you can raise a little money to pay off this debt that you're not authorized to run with all these other programs that are not authorized by the Constitution. So that was a real education for me, and it's great talking about people that know what they're talking about, because it just clarified things for me in a way that I'd never seen it clarified before, and really hadn't had much cause to think about this before. The other thing she mentioned, by the way, is that they apparently can reach, and if they reach, they can go to Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2, which is about territories. And undoubtedly the same swine that would pervert the Commerce Clause in the same way. It says it can regulate commerce among the states, and people live in the states, so it can regulate interstate commerce. And if you live in a state, it can regulate the commerce. Don't you dare do this to me. I can read a sentence. But they're trying to say, well, there's a provision for the federal government being able to administer territories, or administer territories, And that's a pretty big territory we've got out west, so it's legal. Don't be ridiculous. When they talk about territories in the Constitution, we know what a territory is. A territory is a land that is not subject to the laws of the United States of America. That a territory is an official designation by the federal government for land that will eventually become a state, or more than one state. Louisiana Purchase was a territory, and it remained a territory until it was turned into the states that made up the Louisiana Purchase. So you don't get to call this, well, we have a right to administer territory. Really? Well, it's not a territory. There's not the what would be a good word for this? There's not the territory of the Rockies that sits out there in the country that's unowned by anybody and is unmanaged by anybody. All of the land in question is not a territory that exists outside of the other states. All of this federally owned land is owned in the state of Colorado, which is illegal, owned in the state of New Mexico, which is illegal, owned in the state of Washington State, which is illegal, owned in the state of every state, which is illegal. It's all illegal. It's got to go. Got to go. And I think we started the show off by saying this is going to be a heck of an interesting year. I think somebody ought to make the case, if we just did to the Constitution what was written for, we'd all be a lot happier. And then there would be a set of laws that we can all behave by. And if we violate those laws, we can go to jail for it. We don't get to enforce some of it because we're Republicans, and then other parts of it we're going to ignore. And then we don't get to have progressives who enforce part of it and other parts they ignore and violate. No, it's the law. And if you want to change the law, there's a way to change the law. And the way to change the law is to modify the Constitution. Great. If you want to say that the federal government can own a third of the country, then pass the 28th Amendment saying that this amendment hereby overturns Article 1, Section 8, Clause 13 of the Constitution and allows the federal government to buy whatever land they want to. Piece of cake, nothing to it. You probably could even get that passed. But that's not what the case is. And so this is where I start really realizing just how far gone we are and how deep the trouble we are in. When I found out about that, I never knew that. I just didn't know. I'd known that the federal government owned all this land for 100 years. I didn't know it was illegal. I had no idea until this afternoon. I had never read Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. I'd read it. I just didn't understand it. It's that great line from A Fish Called Wanda where he's talking to Kevin Kline, and she accuses him of being an idiot. And Kevin Kline says, aha, well, she says, you're just an ape. You're just an ape. And he says, aha, well, does an ape read philosophy? And she says, yes, he reads it. He just doesn't understand it. And that's pretty much it. So as far as I'm just going to leave it there because we do have to keep it relatively quick time. We've got about another half hour or so. Somebody's asked me a couple times what I thought about this is an aviation thing, and I've been asked about Star Wars, and I want to cover Star Wars, so there'll be spoilers of Star Wars coming up. Somebody asked, I'll keep this real quick because it's kind of an inside baseball kind of question. They asked, did I see the de Havilland Vampire flying at the Reno air races, and what do I think about that? And somebody asked me what's advice for somebody who's exactly 25 years younger than me. Okay, I'll get to that too, because that's been asked a few times. The de Havilland Vampire is one of the very first jets ever, and it is an extremely ugly aircraft. It's far too ugly to be powered by a jet engine, which was invented by a guy named Frank Whittle. That's a whole other story. I might just get into that just a little bit, because I think that's actually much more interesting than this. But they have opened up several years ago, they opened up a category at the Reno Air Races for jets, a little race for jets. And almost all of the jets are L-39s, which I've flown in and shared some videos with you guys with. The L-39 is a Czech trainer, used to train Soviet bloc pilots. It's roughly equivalent to the, it's kind of a cross between the Tweety Bird, the T-37, and the T-38 Talon, which is a supersonic trainer. It's a high performance, feels like a fighter, looks like a fighter, easier to fly than a fighter, generally speaking, in much shorter range. But the L-39 category is great because they're inexpensive. You can get one for $150,000 probably, which is half the price of a brand new Cessna 172. And these things go like a bat out of hell. They'll do 400 knots plus. So at the Reno Air Races, they've been all L-39s, and I watched them, and I thought, oh man, look at these awesome L-39s. They're so beautiful looking. L-39, and then there was, I think, one other jet, and plus a de Havilland Vampire. And the de Havilland Vampire looked like somebody stuck 2 drumsticks into a tomato. It's just the most it's just so rounded and ugly and awful, and it's built in the 50s, I want to say. And so they ran the race, and I thought, oh, poor de Havilland Vampire. It's going to be so embarrassing for that guy. Good for him. Good for him. Taking his jet out there and racing against these real airplanes. I admire people who go into something with that kind of odds stacked against them. And the vampire cleaned their clocks. The vampire just cleaned their clocks, just ate them alive. I couldn't believe my eyes. I was just much faster than them. So I know that's not of great interest to people, and I didn't think about it when I took the question. It surprised me, and it kind of impressed me, and it also made me a little sad. But what is interesting about this is it just led me to a thought, because I'd read an article. We're talking about very, very early British jets, and so. So Scott Ott wants to know what's my personal weakness that somebody could use to employ against me during, let's just say a panel show. You'll get that personal weakness from me, Scott Ott, when you pry it from my cold, dead fingers. But I do want to talk a little bit about the Frank Whittle thing just for a minute, because I've never really talked about him before. Everybody asks me, are you related to Frank Whittle? And it's like, well, I come from England, and the Whittle clan comes from the White Hills. That's where it comes from, Whittle in Lancashire. So I'm sure Frank and I have very similar ancestry back maybe 4 or 5 generations in the coal mines up in northwestern England, but he's certainly not family. He's not related to me directly in any way. In terms of he's my uncle's cousin, no. But undoubtedly there's a connection back there. But I do want to talk about him for a minute, because it's an interesting story, and it's an interesting story, I think, in this way. I read an article about Frank Whittle not too long ago. It was on the 100th anniversary of his birth, and that would have been, I want to say, 2007, somewhere in there. He was born around 1907, something like that. So this article was written in a newspaper, British newspaper, and it was written by a Brit about what Britain does to its inventors. And here's the story. So Frank Whittle's he's a real bright kid, and he joins the RAF, and he joins the RAF, and he becomes a flight engineer, and he essentially writes a term paper, and he writes a term paper on the idea of getting extra energy out of an engine. Now, here's what makes a jet engine work, and this I think is actually generally interesting to the general population. The reason that jet engines work, and the reason that rocket engines are even more powerful than jet engines, is not that they're burning different fuel. If you have a diesel fuel car, and you have a jet-fueled jet, and you have a rocket, they're all essentially burning kerosene, essentially. Diesel fuel's a little different, but they're basically taking something flammable like alcohol or diesel fuel or gasoline, and they're all burning basically the same fuel. The density energy of the fuel is about the same. So why do you get so much more power out of a jet engine than you get out of a piston engine? And why do you get that much more power out of a rocket engine compared to a jet engine? And the answer is, and this is why the jet is so effective, and why the invention was so simple, why the invention of the jet engine was so simple. The difference between a piston engine, internal combustion and airplane engine versus a jet engine versus a rocket engine is what's happening to the oxygen. That's the only difference. The reason they're so much more powerful is only because the oxygen density is so much higher, and it's a nice simple progression. In a traditional piston engine, airplane engine, or the piston engine that drives your car for that matter, you take a cylinder, you open a valve at the top, and you put in gasoline and air. It just flows in because you mix up the gasoline, or you squirt it in with a fuel injection, or you carburate it, and it flows in with the air. And when that valve closes, the piston comes up and it compresses the air, and then the spark fires and fires the piston down, and it gives you the energy that you can extract from that fuel given the amount of oxygen that is in ambient air pressure. Right? Now, that means that as the airplane goes higher and higher and higher into the sky, the air gets thinner and thinner and thinner up there, and so what's called normally aspirated engine, in a regular engine, first of all, you can only fly so high because the ceiling of the airplane is limited by its power plant, and the power plant is limited by how much air there is, how much oxygen there is in the cylinder. As you get higher and higher and higher in a normal airplane engine, the power goes down. You can run the thing at full throttle at 8,000 feet and get 60% power, and you run full throttle at 12,000 feet, you're probably getting 30 or 40% power because there's not enough air anymore. As a stopgap measure, well before World War II, they'd invented something called a turbocharger or a supercharger, and they both do the same thing. Best way to think about a supercharger is to think of somebody holding a blow dryer over that valve. And so if you imagine a guy going whoo with a blow dryer, because a blow dryer is just a turbine, it's just moving air over that intake valve, instead of weak ambient air pressure coming in, he's pressurizing the cylinder. He's pressurizing the air in that cylinder. The difference between a supercharger and a turbocharger, by the way, is a turbocharger is driven by an exhaust gas turbine. So as the exhaust gas comes out, it's driving the turbine, and the turbine is also charging it on the front end. So as the hot gas goes out the back, the turbocharger charges the clean cold air coming into the cylinder, but it's still a mechanical combustion engine. A supercharger is run mechanically. There's a gear that's driving it rather than a turbine. That's the only difference between the two. But basically, the stopgap position was to say, well, if power's falling off as we get higher because the air gets thinner, we'll pressurize the air by pumping it. We'll just compress it a little bit, and we'll pump it into the cylinder. And then that way, you can get a little extra power at sea level. But the main thing that a turbocharger does is it allows you to keep full power all the way up to 25,000, 30,000 feet in some cases. And it was a compromise, but it's a bad compromise because, first of all, a internal combustion engine is nothing. I think the Wright Cyclone engine had 28 cylinders. The last big piston engine was a Wright Cyclone engine, and I think it had 28 cylinders. So 28 pieces of steel that are doing this up and down inside 28 pistons, and there's 28 valves. There's 2 valves, probably 4 valves on each cylinder, so there's 28 of those times 2 or 4 that have to go up and down in perfect action. All the cams, there's 28 of those that have to spin, and all this stuff has to be lubricated, and all has to be jointed, and all has to be matched, and all has to work, and it all has to function at several hundred RPMs, and these things are doing these things thousands of times a minute. And then on top of all of that, the energy that you're creating when that fires a spark, and the spark pushes that exploding gas and drives that piston back. Well, that piston boat goes back a short distance, and then it has to stop and turn around and come back again. And you lose energy when that thing gets to the crankshaft and then comes back again. So it's doing this. So this back and forth thing is driving a wheel, but it's not efficiently driving a wheel. And when the cylinder is coming back up before it gets lit again, it's got all that friction against the cylinder wall. It's not generating any power. It's compressing air as it comes up, and that's not only not generating power, that's pushing against the engine, basically. And then 4-cylinder engine, and I'm getting a little complex, but here. So a 4-cylinder engine is not like bang, shoom, bang, shoom, bang, shoom. That's a 2-stroke engine. A 4-stroke engine, I said 4-cylinder, meant to say 4-cycle, 4-stroke engine. 4-stroke engine does this. It goes bang, fires, compresses out, drives the bad air out, doesn't fire. So this is all dead energy. This is all just friction and compression that you have to pay for. Then it comes out and it sucks the new air in, and that valve closes, and then it goes and it fires bang. So it's out, in, bang. Let me try that again. Bang, exhale, inhale, bang. Not bang, bang, bang. A 2-stroke engine is more efficient but a lot more likely to fail. So far so good, right? Internal combustion engine is just taking ambient air pressure, and it's using the oxygen available in the air, and it's doing this incredibly inefficient, mechanically very complex, likely to fail kind of thing. And the reason you had 4 engines on a jetliner was because on a commercial airplane, the reason you had 4 engines on a B-17 or a B-24 was because they're so likely to fail that an engine failure is not at all common. My mom nearly got killed as a flight attendant for British Airways. She was flying a Stratolounger, which is basically a Stratocruiser, rather. That's Stratolounger is us. She was flying a Stratocruiser, which was basically a B-17 modified to have a pressurized passenger cabin, but the wing and the tail are straight B-17. She was a flight attendant for British Airways on one of those. She was crossing the Atlantic on Christmas Eve, and they were at their cruising altitude, which is probably mid-20s, I want to say, and they lost an engine. Okay, well, it can hold altitude on 2 engines. And then it lost a second engine, and now it's starting to descend, and they're diverting for Gander, Greenland, which was, 5 hours away from where they were on the mid-Atlantic track. And then they were almost ready to lose the third engine, and they would have gone into the water on Christmas Eve off the coast of Greenland, which is where the Titanic went down. That water temperature is a little below freezing. Because of the salt, it's probably 31 degrees. You got about 5-10 minutes in that water. And it was going down. And the Pan Am flight turned around and came back and circled around them, and the Pan Am pilot radioed the British Air flight, BOAC at the time that my mom was on. Pan Am pilot says, "Don't worry, we're going to be with you the whole time. We're not going to leave you. We're going to stay here with you for the whole duration." And the British Airways BOAC pilot broadcast that back to the passengers. And they got down to about, I want to say 2,000-3,000 feet. And then on 2,000-3,000 feet, they got one of them restarted. And then I think they got another one restarted. And they were able to limp back to Gander, and the whole crew, including my mom, got big citations and a lot of press and all that other stuff. So, but those engines fail because there's 28 cylinders and probably 1,000 moving parts. scores of spark plugs. It all has to happen at the same time. So all of this to say, along comes Frank Whittle, young guy trying to get more power for engines for fighter planes for the Battle of Britain is still 10, 15 years in the future. But he writes a term paper. And basically he says, rather than having all this stuff going back and forth and all this other stuff, we don't need more powerful fuels. We need to get more oxygen in there. So he basically comes up with the simplest mechanical device you can make, with the exception of a rocket, which is actually simpler. If the 28-cylinder Wright Cyclone engine had 1,000 moving parts, essentially the jet engine has one moving part. It's got one axle that goes through the center of it, and at the front of it is a series of turbine blades, and as they spin, they compress the air, and they just literally move it back an inch, and a new series of blades spins it even harder and compresses it more and compresses it more. So there's a series of 5 or 6 turbines in the front that are the compressor stages, and they take air and they compress it. And by compressing it, if you put twice the amount of air into the same space as you had before, you've got twice the oxygen, you've got twice the amount of power. And it just compresses it. And when you inject fuel into compressed air and light it, it's spectacular. It's spectacular what happens. It's amazing how much energy, because the limit to the energy output wasn't based on the fuel. It was based on the oxidizer, which was ambient air for most of the history of aviation prior to the jet engine. So the beautiful thing about this is, now this energy, you compress the air and everything's just one piece is turning. That's all that's happening. It's only one piece. And all this air has been compressed against the outside of the jet engine and compresses it right into this kind of center where it's really, really dense air. And then they shoot some fuel in there and light it on fire. This stuff comes blowing out. And it's constructed in such a way so that the exhaust goes straight out through the engine. And as the exhaust gases are coming out through the engine, they go through another series of turbines. And these turbines turn the compressors at the front. So the hot air coming out of the back is turning the compressors that are compressing the air at the front, and off you go. Now, as it turns out, there's an even simpler way to make a jet engine. That's called a ramjet. And basically, if you're going fast enough, you don't even need the compressors at all. You don't need the turbines on the back. If you take a bucket, basically, just take a garden pail and move it through the air fast enough, it's going to compress air at the bottom of the pail. And if you light that, it comes out the back. You can keep pushing that pail through the air faster and faster and faster. That's a ramjet. But the problem with a ramjet is you have to be moving pretty fast before it's going to work. Nice thing about this turbine, this gas turbine engine, that's a proper name for it, the jet engine, is that it will work at sea level at a standing stop. It'll start compressing air and pump it in there, and off you go. So that's why the jet engine works. And the neat thing about a jet engine is, unlike the combustion engine, which gets weaker and weaker and weaker as the air gets thinner and thinner and thinner, that a jet engine loves it up there. Because the jet engine is compressing air, the jet engine is most efficient probably at 30,000 feet, 40,000 feet, because the air is very thin up there, but the jet engine doesn't care because it's compressing the air. And while the air is very thin, that's bad for power, the air being very thin is terrific for speed because you don't have to push the airplane through that mass of air. You get very, very thin up there. So you can go really, really fast, and the jet engine loves it up there. It's happy as it can be. It's taking air, it's compressing it, shooting it out the back, and since the air's so thin, we don't have that much drag on the airframe, and off you go, happy days. And since it's essentially one moving part, its failure rate is next to nothing. It's virtually foolproof, and they almost always give you some warning when they're ready to go, because it is literally one bearing. It's one moving part. So after, the Boeing 707 was a 4-engine jetliner, premiered, I want to say, about 1958. And between 1958, 68, 78, by the time we've got 20 years on this thing, by 78, certainly earlier than that, probably around 73 or 4, comes a 737. This original 737 had tiny little engines on it. I'll get to that in a second too. But once you came up with a 737, you had arrived. We are now, every airplane that flies is essentially a 737. And by that I mean it is a twin-engine commercial jetliner. That is the final evolution of the design in terms of the technology we have now, and we haven't done anything different since the early 70s. 2 engines, one under each wing, as close together as possible, so if one fails, you don't have a lot of differential thrust. The engines are so reliable that we don't need 4 of them anymore. 2's enough, and they're so powerful now, and this is the difference. They're so powerful now that in order for an airplane to be certified for a commercial jet to enter service, and this is a perfectly reasonable it's got to be able to climb with one engine dead. In fact, That's the only reason you would ever have a twin-engine airplane, right? Take a twin-engine airplane like the DC-3. 2 propellers, classic DC-3 C-47 from World War II. Why do you have 2 engines on that? Well, obviously you have 2 engines in case one fails. But if you have 2 engines, you're twice as likely to have an engine failure, right? So the trade-off is it's enough power to climb on one, but it really needs 2 to do the job. So right now, we have a twin-engine jet. And that's awesome. I'll make one more quick adjustment to the jet engine. This is not something Frank Whittle invented. Frank Whittle invented the idea of a turbine compressing air into a combustion chamber and having the hot gas come out the back and have it drive the whole system. That's the gas turbine engine. And they say it was co-invented by Frank Whittle and a German guy, but that's not what happened. Frank Whittle invented it. His paper was patented. The Germans got a hold of the patent, and everybody who worked on the German jet engine, which actually flew first, there's no question the German jet flew first, but it's only because the Germans didn't throw it away. Everybody who was questioned about the development of that jet engine, I forget the name of the German engineer who came up with it. Every one of them said, no, we read the Frank Whittle paper. Once we read the Frank Whittle paper, there's nothing to it. Now, one more thing to say is this. The original jet engine that Frank Whittle designed and the jet engines on the 707, the jet engines on the first 737s, the jet engines on the 727s are very narrow. They're very thin. If you see a really, really old 737, it's like somebody hung 2 straws underneath that wing. It's amazing how small those engines are. And those jet engines are true jet engines. They're true. It's a true jet engine in the sense that all of the air goes through the engine, is ignited, and comes out the back. But what they realized probably in the late 60s, early 70s was this. You've got that turbine that's driving the compression turbines, right? That's making the whole jet engine work. So far, so good. But they're generating a hell of a lot of mechanical force there, a lot of mechanical force. And that mechanical force is eventually being wasted. In other words, you've gotten a lot more energy out of the system than you can move by moving it into the compressor. So what they said was, hey, got a genius idea. In front of the engine now, we're going to put really big blades. And when the engine turns, the part around the engine core is going to compress that air, and it's going to go through the engine just like everything else. But the rest of those blades are just going to be out spinning for free in the air, and it's going to generate a hell of a lot of thrust. So when you look at a jet engine today, it's called a turbofan engine. The turbofan engine, a good way to think of it is every engine you've ever flown on, well, you ever fly on today anyway commercially, is essentially a jet turning a propeller that has 40 blades on it. That fan, most of the air on that fan is going around the engine and not through it. And the reason I bring all this up is for those people that talk about chemtrails. People say contrails didn't used to look like this back when I was growing up. You're absolutely right. Contrails used to be much thinner when I was growing up. Yes. And the reason they look different now is because our government is spraying poisons on us, and thousands of hours a day they're spreading poisons on us because the contrails look different and they last a lot longer. You know, you just have to ask yourself. I did talk to somebody who believed in the chemtrails once, and I said, so tell me how this works. What do you mean? Explain it. You're convinced that these jets are spraying residual poisons, which is why you see these contrails up there now, when you didn't before, lasting for hours. So how does that work? Well, what do you mean? Are they commercial jets or are they military jets that are spraying the poison? I don't know. Well, they got to land somewhere, right? Air traffic control has to see them, right? I mean, you can't have all these jets flying up there in the jetways, and every time you look at a passenger, when you see a black jet owned by the government spraying all these poisons on people, so it doesn't really sound like it can be military jets, right? Right. Okay, that's it. So you're saying that commercial pilots and commercial airplanes are spraying these poisons. Yeah, that's it. Well, how does that work? You know, there's 40,000 flights a day in this country, and pilots don't get to fly all of them. Several pilots for one airplane over the course of a day. So before every pilot does his mission, he walks around the airplane and he does a visual inspection. So where are these injectors located on the airplane where the pilot has to see them? He's looking into the jet engine. So you've got 100,000 pilots a day flying in this country, flying 40,000 commercial flights. How come we don't see them? How come the pilots don't go, what the hell is this thing doing here? My God, that smells like arsenic. Why doesn't he report it? And at this point, this is when I knew it. When I began to realize to my dismay how so many people think. This woman said to me, well, they don't report it because the government pays them a lot of money. And they said they're going to kill their families if they tell. So I basically said, so you're telling me that every commercial pilot who flies for a living in this country is in on this conspiracy, and they're doing it to make money under the table, and furthermore, if any single one of them speaks up, they're going to kill their families. Yep. They're kind of killing their families right now, though, aren't they, if your theory's correct? I mean, you're basically saying that these people are paid to spray poison over forget their own country, forget their own citizens. They're being paid to spray poison over their own families, right? Over their own kids, over their own wives, right? And there's 100,000 people that go through this every single day, not to mention all the people on the ground who have to fill up these toxin tanks on the airplane, not to mention all the support people who have to drive the trucks full of the poison that then have to get onto the airport to spray them into the jet injectors on the commercial flights so they go up and shoot this poison over people. And there's probably 250,000 people in on this conspiracy every single day for the last 30 years. That's what you're telling me? Yep. Well, I'm telling you that I think there's a different explanation for why contrails last longer than they used to, and the reason is because the jet engine is designed differently, because it's much more efficient. As I said before, all the energy on a jet engine used to go right through the engine, so you used to take a small amount of air and move it very, very fast through the engine. And that made a small contrail, because a contrail is caused by hot gases condensing and forming ice crystals at altitude. Now, since about 1979 or so, somewhere in there, since the early 80s, these high bypass engines don't just take all the air through the engine. Most of the air goes around the engine. So instead of a little bit of air moving very fast, it moves more air a little more slowly. And the total width of the contrail is probably, 5-6 times what it used to be before. So now you got this whole giant mass of air that has a hot little core in the middle, and when conditions are right, it forms a huge amount of ice crystals compared to what it used to do before. Now, which one do you think is more likely? Because if I showed you a picture of a jet from when you were a kid, a jet engine, I'll show you a picture of a 707, and you'll see how big the engines are, and I'll show you a picture of a 747, which does have the high bypass engines. You'll see how much bigger they are, how much wider. So which one do you think is more likely? And then you realize that people are nuts. Well, first of all, it's not really fair to them because no one's ever really explained it to them before. Once you explain it to them, they realize how untenable this stuff is. But until you do, what the hell do they know about jet engines? They're told that they're being poisoned. They see contrails up there they didn't see before. I don't blame them. I just blame the lunatics that are lying to them. And I kind of blame the people like us who haven't explained it to them before. It's a much more persistent contrail because the amount of volume exposed to the heat and the cold is enormously larger than it used to be. And it's been that way for 30, 40 years. And there's nothing mysterious about it. And the number of people involved in the conspiracy is zero. Zero. And the fact that so many sensible people can believe this kind of stuff is an indication of just how awful our education system is, how awful our science education is, and how awful the perceived level of the government is, and so on. So anyway, that's that. Oh, and by the way, just going to say to the rockets. So if you want to really have some fun, because the whole rant that I just did was about energy density based on oxygen. If you really want to have some fun, go look on YouTube and look up barbecue with liquid oxygen, because if you had a lot of energy from oxygen in compressed air, just imagine how much energy from oxygen there would be in air that was compressed so much it was turned to liquid oxygen. If you compress air enough, it'll actually turn into a liquid. Theoretically, if you press it enough, it turn into a solid. So when you get to a rocket now, you're talking about oxygen density so high that in order for it to function, it's got to be stored at 270 degrees or whatever below zero, because we've got to keep it as a liquid, because liquid oxygen is so dense in oxygen that this is the point I've been trying to raise with this whole thing. I love talking about jets, but the thing that's so interesting is the fuel for a propeller engine and the fuel for a jet engine and the fuel for a rocket engine is essentially the same fuel. It's basically either kerosene or alcohol. It's essentially the same thing. It just burns. So it's much more powerful because of the oxygen load. So go to YouTube and look up liquid oxygen and backyard barbecue. And you'll find a few people who've taken a normal backyard barbecue, normal coals, and this is what I love about this. We all know how much heat comes off of a charcoal grill. We all know how much heat comes off a charcoal grill because unless you're a communist, you've been grilling meat in this country since you've been a kid. So you know how much heat a charcoal grill will generate. And it's something we can all measure. We're used to it. We know exactly how much heat it radiates. And then that's because those charcoals are the same. The coals haven't changed. And a normal charcoal grill is taking the oxygen that's available to it from normal standard air pressure. But if you blow compressed air on that thing, that's what a bellows does, by the way. You know, the reason a furnace, blacksmith, is able to melt iron is not because when he hits that bellows, he's blowing compressed air into the furnace. That's why that furnace can get so hot. It's only because of the compressed air. That's what the bellows is doing. Is it's a very inefficient compressor that's adding heat to the furnace that the blacksmith is using by adding oxygen to the fire. But if you take a look at this thing where you'll see just a regular charcoal grill and it's filled with regular charcoals and it's just doing this lovely warm hamburger thing, and somebody puts some liquid oxygen in there, it's like a nuclear bomb. It's incredible. It's incredible how hot that'll burn. It's just great. It's just great to know. Great to know. I think it's cool. You may not, but I do. It's my show. That's how it works. Anyway, I'll take this one, and maybe I have time for one more. I guess somebody's been asking me about moral superiority from the beginning. We'll do these last two. We'll call it a day. What would my recommendation be, or my advice be to somebody who's exactly 25 years younger than me? Well, if you're half normal, you're probably already older than me emotionally, and in a lot of ways, you're probably a lot more serious than I am. If you're, what would that make you? 27. I can do the math here. I used to be able to do the math. So you'd be 23. Sorry, 28. You're 28 years old. Probably by this point, you're certainly more further along than I ever was when I was 28. I missed my 20s and 30s and half of my 40s just wandering around in the wilderness trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do with my life. But there are opportunities for somebody who would be kind of like me at that age. And my friend Foghorn is keep asking me about, do I want to take something about a mission? I'll go on it. Do I want to take for our 10,000 strike pool? Strike rate suggested. Oh, I see. He's just to get off the subject for a second. Our friend Foghorn is saying they're going to launch their 10,000 strike. When is it going to happen? They've got a pool betting date. I'll take that in private. I may put $5 down on that. Anyway, if you're 25 years younger than me, then what would you do? It's flattering that you're listening to me. I've always lately I've thought a lot, man, if I could go back and talk to myself when I was 30 or so, in this case 26, 28. What's the matter with me? I'd be able to save myself a lot of time. I was a lot more liberal than I am now, and I learned an awful lot, and I learned these things through independent study and through reading a lot and just experience, and things I thought were true aren't true, and things that I thought were false are true, and things are sometimes a lot more obvious than I thought they would be, and sometimes they're not so obvious. Some things are not very obvious. You would think if you gave money to poor people, they'd stop being poor, but that would be the obvious thought, but that's not what happens. And I know why it doesn't happen, because I've been poor. I've been broke for a decade or two. And I know what it's like to have my power turned off every month. And that's not a question of not making enough money. And it's not a question of anything other than just a very complicated series of bad decisions that are made for understandable reasons, but can be changed at any time if you're serious about it. So I like to think, this is actually an interesting point to make. It's actually, in fact, I think this is actually quite a good point, and I probably should just leave it at this. So while I don't want to give you any specifics because I think it'd be extremely arrogant, when I was 28, I was extremely arrogant. Here's the point I think I'd try to take out of this. If I could go back in time and give advice to somebody who is exactly 25 years younger than me, myself, if I could give myself advice when I was 28, half a lifetime ago, I'm not sure that I would have listened to me when I was 28. I'm not entirely sure I would have listened to me at all. But this is the point I'm trying to make. If somebody came to me now from, 112? If my 112-year-old self came back to me and said, listen, this, and this that you believe is wrong, I would absolutely listen to him. I would absolutely take that advice. So I think that's probably the best thing I can give you out of this, my friend, is, and I didn't get the name, I'm so sorry. Maybe you can put it up there and I'll credit you. I'm sorry I didn't write it down. The difference between me and me 25 years ago is that 25 years ago, I don't believe I would have taken good advice, even if it was coming from my future self. But today, I certainly would. I certainly would. If my future self said, hey, you thought this, it didn't pan out, or these things changed, or this was just a false assumption of yours, or the science has proven something. If, let's say that my 112-year-old self comes back and says, Bill, you're wrong about global warming. It's actually happened, and it was real, and you were wrong about this one. then I'd become an advocate for global warming. And I don't need my 112-year-old self to come back. I need some evidence, because I like to be where I'm right. I like to be where the truth is. And if I'm wrong, I'll move. That's why it's so hard to... that's why I'm never wrong. It's because I'm mobile. It's not because I'm born right. It's because I'm highly mobile. And when I see evidence that indicates that the truth is over there, that's where I'll move. And once I'm sitting on the truth, that's where I'm going to argue from, and that's why it's so terribly, terribly, terribly difficult to defeat me in arguments. Not because of any skill I have, it's just because I bounce around a lot, and I pay attention. Like the conspiracy thing we talked about earlier, chemtrails or 9/11. Just pretty straightforward, really. You just grant the premise. Did a missile hit the Pentagon? There's no video of the airplane striking the building. Well, the videos were taken a frame every second, maybe 2 frames a second. You got a jet moving at 600 miles an hour, covering a field of view maybe 100 yards wide. It's not inconceivable that the jet went through there, in between the shutters. Well, we don't have pictures, so it was a missile attack. Okay, well, the missile got through the. There's no picture of the missile either. So whatever disadvantage my side may have had, when I say it was an airplane, you say there's no picture of an airplane. Therefore, it was a missile. Well, there's no picture of a missile either. So you don't win on that one. We're even. There's no picture of the airplane. There's no picture of the missile. But the government said it was an airplane. The news reports said it was an airplane. The passengers on board the airplane had to be murdered someplace, so they're gone. All those people had to be involved. And the thing I would say to the people who said it was a missile is, well, buddy, if it was a missile, then the guy who launched the missile had to be in on the conspiracy, and the guy who made the missile and the guys who fueled the jet that had the missile had to be in on the conspiracy. All the people who were murdered on the plane had to be in on the conspiracy. All the pilots and all the ground service people working for the airline, they had to be in on the conspiracy. But much, much more importantly than that, because that's impossible, but this is where it becomes ridiculous. Every single person driving in traffic that day had to be in on the conspiracy. So every single person who was on the road who saw that plane hit had to be in on the conspiracy, and they had to be backdated, so that as their cars passed the Pentagon, only the people who were in on the conspiracy would be told about the missile, because those people had to know it was a missile because they looked up and saw an airplane. That can't happen. They've got to lie. If these people are in on the conspiracy, they got to say, well, okay, I saw the missile, but since I'm in on the conspiracy, I'll say it was a jet. So every single person in traffic in both directions in the morning, those people had to be timed out so that they all left their homes at various places all around the country, so that all of them had to arrive at exactly the right moment. And then only the people who've been in on the conspiracy had to be crossing at that time, because you can't have somebody and say, hey, guess what? It's going to be say it's an airplane even though it's a missile, because now you've opened the conspiracy to somebody you don't need. And if one person sneaks through, somebody got on a ramp early or somebody got out of bed early or something, and he gets in there early, he says, Jesus Christ, it was a missile. So all of the commuters had to be in on the conspiracy. And Reverend Crisp, Major Crisp, who was conducting the ceremony on the Hill in Arlington National Cemetery that morning, he had to be on the conspiracy too. And all of the guys in the Army Honor Guard who were out there getting ready for a ceremony that morning, they had to be in on the conspiracy because they looked up and saw an airplane. That's what they said anyway. If it was really a missile, they'd all have to be pre-briefed. So you got 100,000 people now. Civilians, regular civilians, by the way. These aren't military convoys going outside the Pentagon. You got to take regular people who are in regular convoys, and you have to take every one of them aside, 200,000 of them one by one, and say, all right, here's what's going to happen. We're going to attack the Pentagon. Who's we? The government is. Okay, so here's what we need you to do, and if you don't do this, we'll kill you, but if you do, we'll probably send you some money. So we need you to drive to work just like normal, and we'll have all timed out, so don't worry. That's why we've contacted you specifically, because we know exactly what moment you're going to pass the Pentagon, you see. So here's the deal. We're going to launch a missile attack, but when it happens, you have to say that you saw an airplane, because that's our cover, you see. We're gonna kill the people that were on board this airplane, but we're going to launch a missile. But in order to sell the story, you've got to admit that you saw the airplane, you see? That's how we'll get away with all this. Understand? Yeah. So housewives and immigrants and generals and servicemen and everybody has to be pre-briefed, and they have to leave their house at exactly the right time to get right in front of the Pentagon so they can all say they saw an airplane and not the actual missile that was really fired. Now, which seems more likely to you? That or the fact that the plane flew through the intervals in the frames, because back in those days they were taking a picture a second, and there was no evidence of the jet because the plane flew through that little space so fast that they just missed the picture. And by the way, your missile missed the picture too. Which one do you believe? Oh, and by the way, the hole was too small. Well, here's a picture of a jet. Here's an F-4 Phantom on a rocket rail, and it's hitting a brick wall. was shot in the 70s, I want to say. They were worried that an airplane striking a concrete containment building on a nuclear reactor would breach the containment. So what they did was they took a giant, thick hunk of concrete, took a heavy, heavy fighter bomber, the F-4 Phantom, put it on a rail, lit a rocket behind it, and hit that wall at 450, 500 miles an hour. And what happens? Does the plane punch a plane-sized hole in the concrete wall? Because the Pentagon is in fact a fortress. It's a concrete wall. Does the airplane punch a plane-sized hole in that block of concrete? No, it doesn't. It doesn't punch a hole at all. It simply turns to dust. And you can watch this video. I highly recommend it. It's F-4 Phantom on YouTube. You can see it everywhere. F-4 Phantom hitting a brick wall. And it basically, the nose of the airplane gets closer and closer and closer. And then the nose of the airplane hits the wall. And as the plane continues to compress into the wall, it just turns into vapor, and there's nothing left. There's a scratch on the concrete wall. And the reason that is because airplanes, while very strong, are extremely light. There's not much to them there. If you take a car can weigh 2,000-3,000 pounds and move 4 people. But if you want to move 4 people in an airplane, you've got to do it in a quarter of that weight. Why? Because while a car is nice and solid, you want a car solid. You want steel beams on the side doors. You got steel impact side doors, and you've got steel up front. You got steel in the back. You got all this protection. You got airbags. You got all that other stuff. Why don't you have it on an airplane? Well, because unfortunately, fortunately, the car doesn't have to fly. Because if the car did have to fly, it would have to be far, far, far lighter than it is, given the power plant. And so an airplane is like a bird. Birds' wings are hollow. They're strong, but they're hollow. The interior design of a bird's wing is an incredible piece of evolution where all of these, essentially these cross girders are formed inside a bird wing, so it's very rigid, but it's hollow. There's nothing inside. It's very light. Airplanes are very strong, but they're light because they're hollow. If you look inside an airplane wing, there's nothing in there. It's not solid aluminum. It's not a block of aluminum, because if it was a block of aluminum, this thing would never get off the ground. The airplane wing is hollow. Series of ribs and spars and trusses, but mostly it's empty. You fill it with fuel. That's fine. But when this hollow thing hits a piece of concrete, it just goes away. It just disintegrates. It turns literally to dust. It doesn't turn to atoms, but it turns to dust. And you can watch it happen before your own eyes. Turns out there were some holes in the building because the jet engines, the core of the jet engines, have some mass. And the landing gear's got some mass. The rest of it is just very thin and fragile. My dad was telling me, I was watching an old movie or a TV show, I think, called 12 O'Clock High. It was about B-17s over Germany. This was when I was a little kid, early 60s. And I'd see these guys in these bombers, and they're going on, and I'd see these guys inside with the machine guns, and the German planes are coming through, and the flak's going off, and I'd see the bullets come through the skin, and then the flak burst through the skin. And I said to my dad, what's going on here? They're in a metal cylinder. What's the bullets coming through? Why aren't the bullets in the flak just bouncing off? And he said, the skin on an airplane's about thin as a dime. It could have blown me over with a feather. It's what? Yeah, it's skin on the airplane's about that thick. Really? Yeah. That's why the bullets go right through it. It's about as thick as much thinner than a frying pan. It's about as thick as a Jiffy Pop pan. About as thin as the bottom pan on a Jiffy Pop. Oh. Which is why when they found the wreckage at Roswell, we found a UFO. Really? Mm-hmm. We found a craft capable of traveling interstellar distances. Really? It can go trillion miles. It can go 20 trillion miles. Yes. Okay. It's pretty advanced navigation, huh? Yeah. It's made out of titanium. Uh-huh. And it's got some kind of a warp drive or some kind of a star drive that allows it to travel not from here to Mars without any fuel or anything like that, but from here to Alpha Centauri in a reasonable amount of time. Mm-hmm. Okay. You wouldn't think a vehicle like that would actually hit a mountain, but put that aside for a second. How come all the wreckage you can find of this vehicle is what you would expect to find if you took 15 Jiffy poppers and blew them up? Why is all the wreckage thin, wrinkled, crushed aluminum, and there's only about this much of it? It's in a pile this big. I would have thought something that amazing and that dense and that high energy would have made a smoking hole that went down to the center of the earth. But as it turns out, it's just enough wreckage to make a couple of, lawn chairs out of. Maybe that much. Nobody thinks these things through, and because you don't want to, right? It's much more fun to believe in flying saucers and Loch Ness monsters and Yetis than it is to think about why they can't exist. I think technically, I think I've said this before, if I had to pick one, I think the Yeti's most likely. I still think it's not there, but it's most likely. And since we're turning this into a conspiracy show, and I'd love to do a show just on conspiracies again, I think we did one once. Why is it, unfortunately, why is it that the best picture of the Loch Ness Monster ever taken, the best picture ever taken of the Loch Ness Monster, is a blurry image called the surgeon's picture, and we later find out that the best picture ever taken of the Loch Ness Monster was not only a fake, but it was a fake and the model was about this high. And why is it that the best single picture of Sasquatch, of Bigfoot, why is it that the best single picture of him turned out to be a guy in a suit with a zipper? And we knew it, and we didn't know it at the time, but over time, we found out, here's a suit. Isn't that kind of heartbreaking? Don't you think that's evidence in itself that the best UFO picture and the best Loch Ness Monster picture and the best Yeti picture, all three of them are known frauds? If they're really there, wouldn't that suck, don't you think? We got a speck in the distance, we got a little rustle in the leaves. We got something could be anything. And your best evidence in all three cases are frauds? That would certainly bum me out just a little bit. Hey, look at the time. I've got a nephew and a sister who are getting off an airplane in the not too distant future, and I need to go and get some other things set up for them. I don't mean to make this ending quite so abruptly, but that actually has got fun. Once we got into airplanes, and as always, get lathered up, and then conspiracy theories and all the rest of it. Yeah, it's been kind of fun. I think it's been fun to not know what the hell I was going to talk about, and I'm sorry if you didn't get your question taken. And I know it's very frustrating to keep entering that thing every 10 seconds or 40 seconds or whatever, but I certainly had a good time. Hopefully you guys did too. At this point, I think I'm going to excuse and recuse myself from the Stratosphere Lounge so that I can go and get my little nephew and take him up to see some snow, and I think he's going to see some snow like snow has never been seen before. It's been snowing like crazy up there. Crazy. So this is episode number 110. We're 10% of the way to episode 200. Seems like we did 100 just a little while ago. As always, thank you so much for your support, your membership. For those of you who are BillWhittle.com members, it keeps the lights on here and keeps Carla and me busy, and she's just done an incredible job of running this like an actual business instead of the limited mental resources that I can apply to these kind of things. And we do have all these changes that we were hoping to have on the 1st of January, but they just aren't ready, and we're not going to rush them. We're going to get them done right. So have a new website and a bunch of other new programming and stuff, and as soon as it's ready, you will be the first to know. So that'll do it for episode number 110 of the Stratosphere Lounge tonight. Thanks very much for joining us. It was the Tell Us Your Comments As We Go section edition. And hopefully I'll be back next Wednesday. Certainly the Wednesday after that. I'd like to get back to doing them every week. It's certainly my preference, although it is on many levels, unfortunately, bottom of the totem pole in terms of just my raw available time. Sometimes just things come up and I just can't do anything about them. So thanks so much for your understanding. I'm sorry about having to move it to Thursday, and I hope that didn't infect you any, Scott. That's it. Thanks very much for watching, and we're going to go to the closing banner now, and then I'm going to turn the buttons off, and I will be on my way, and I will see you guys hopefully in a week or so. But thanks again for joining us tonight, and God bless you all. Be careful and expect for an interesting year. We'll see you soon. Okay. Push the button, Frank.